Here we are at Oso Negro Coffee Roastery. It's in this funky old building here in Nelson. It has NRG bike parts, it has the Nelson Brewery, it has some Silver King tofu, it has Kootenai chai, some potters and whatnot. Really funky building. Anyways, we walk on up and we go in through the main door and we're gonna meet Mike Tremblay, who is one of two of the roasters here at the roastery. Okay, go.
This is our 1954 45 kilo Probat coffee roaster made in Germany. Pre-1958, the neck, the front plate, the back plate, they're all cast iron. It has much better heat retention qualities than stamped steel machines. We've been roasting on this machine now for 3 full years. It was for sale in Vancouver from a coffee roastery that had closed down. This is an increase from our 22 kilogram Probat roaster that we previously roasted on for about a dozen years. So just some basics on how the machine works. We will have pre-weighed green beans that we dump into this hopper, and we can control this kind of homemade opening. It follows down through this pipe, up, across, and into the hopper on the top of the roaster. And it's powered by a large 3-phase fan that's creating draw, so it essentially becomes a bit of a vacuum cleaner and will pull up 85 pounds of beans in about a minute and a half. So our process, the roaster of course is not on right now for ease of making this video, but using our temperature control tracking software, we'll wait until the roaster gets up to temperature, and then to allow the beans in, I pull down on this handle, which opens a gate, which allows the beans to fall into the roaster, which is tumbling around over and over. You can see the inside is kind of like a cement mixer, and that keeps the beans tumbling. If they were to sit on the bottom and go back and forth, they would end up burning on one side and being completely green on the other. So after about 9.5 minutes, the beans will start to expand and make an auditory crack. Then we know that that's time for us to do a bit of temperature variation and to maintain a close proximity to the roaster. At about 11 minutes, we'll be getting into a second crack. And then we'll just be fine-tuning the temperature for our individual roasts. So essentially all of our roasts are being pulled by temperature now. It just allows myself and the other roaster to be super consistent. So when the roast comes up to temperature, we'll let it out of the roaster and into this cooling tray where the arm is turning around. There's another large fan drawing air down through this perforated steel, and that captures the majority of the smoke and also helps the coffee cool quickly and evenly. It takes about 2.5 minutes to cool. The full roasting process from dumping in to letting it out of the tray is about 16 minutes, and of that, it's about 13 minutes of actual roasting time. So the machine itself is working by, there's a barrel on the inside turning around. It's all powered by a single motor in the back, and then using various gears, it's powering different belts and what have you. So the airflow in the roaster is coming from the back, the fresh air, through the barrel, in with the coffee, and then all of the exhaust comes up through the neck, through the connecting pipe, and then back through here, and then into, this is the chaff collector. So it's this papery material that comes off the beans when they expand. It's very flammable, obviously hot. This is sometimes where we'll have sparks land in the chaff. We'll get the odd fire, nothing major for several years now, so that's very good. And then going up, these two stacks, this is from the cooling tray, this is the hot stack, and those both go up through the roof and into our 2.5 million BTU afterburner, which is essentially a jet engine, which is just incinerating all the smoke. So that allows us to operate in the middle of town without too many complaints.
Good. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's
Do you want to show me the bucket elevator and stuff that you guys use?
I didn't really figure
could actually go into the basement since there isn't a whole crowd.
Okay.
That might actually give them a better idea.
And I know you have a thermocouple here. Here's your thermocouple on the front. There it is, right there. Thermocouple. It's their temperature sensor.
Yeah, so that would be the bean, and then this one's measuring environmental temperature.
Okay.
So originally, when this machine was made, this control box and control unit would not have been included. All that would have been done is installation of the 3 burner controls. So this controls the first single burner, middle 2 burners, back 2 burners. So you can control all 5 somewhat independently, but you can't. It's quite clever with these wedges. I can't have the back one on and not the front where the pilot light is. So then you would have a bunch of gas building up. You could have like a little mini explosion. When this machine was made, as I was saying, none of these control units were on. In the 80s, ProBat was going out to roasteries that were using these machines and updating the system so that you can turn the drum on by a single switch, the burners, and then our cooling system and the cooling tray, as well as the loader. So it's pretty convenient, very 1980s technology styled. And then a control unit, which would be pretty common in most plants. Probably rare to have only just one. This is our grain elevator. This is how we load all of our silos, and we'll have a look at the silos in a bit. This was made in Ohio. That's truly what it is for. It's a grain elevator used on farms. It consists of a belt. The motor is at the very top, about 3 stories above us. Large belt with several about hand-sized Teflon buckets. So we can dump a 150-pound bag of coffee. This will hold about half of it at a time, but it pulls out of there super fast. Really, the time constraint, the speed constraint is on how far the coffee has to travel from the roof to drop into one of the silos. So sometimes we have to load it a bit slower. This machine's been pretty good. They're actually designed to work every day heavily. So we use this maybe once a day for about an hour. So the amount of maintenance that we've had to do on this thing in the last 5 years is minimal, which is great. It's always nice to have very dependable equipment.
So sorry, you said that it depends on where you guys are storing your beans at the moment. So whether they're in the basement here, you can just dump them in to this little tin opening, or if we're upstairs, you dump them into this hopper that you'll show us upstairs, and it comes through on this pipe, I see, and right back down.
That's
okay,
correct, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if you pan back to the rest of this bean mezzanine, we can put about 50 pallets of coffee at 10 to 11 bags per pallet. But if you pan to the stairs, they're all unloaded by hand and slid down this ramp. So 150-pound bags, two guys stacking, roll it in, pulling out another pallet. We only fill this bean mezzanine when we have to, when we're getting a full truckload from our bean distributor in California. Otherwise, we'll unload upstairs, which is actually what's happening right now.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so that's where the upstairs option to load the bean elevator really comes in handy.
Okay.
So, we're in the roastery here. So all of our bins with our blends for production are set up on that side of the shelf, closest to the production zone. And then these are all our bins of straight varietals that we would then use with the scale to make up those blends. And then the one component of the roaster we didn't quite go over was the destoner. So you can see there's air ducting, so that's creating the draw. And then this is the channel that is calibrated so that the rocks only really make it up about halfway, and then they'll drop down into this guy. So you can actually see an example of the rocks here. So it's like concrete mostly.
So just enough of a vacuum pressure to be able to pull up the coffee beans, but not the rock.
That's correct. Yeah. And then, of course, the coffee ends up in here, so we can hold up to 3 full roasts in there if we want to blend them together, just like, say, 3 medium roast Central Americans, so they're all consistent. And then these are the silos, and here's an example of the green coffee. It's really small, really hard. You can't do anything with it other than roast it. And then this is another room for our green bean storage. So this was the order that was just delivered today. You can see 11 bags per pallet mostly. We actually got some decent pallets that they came on this time. But yeah, this amount of coffee, we could go through it in about 2 weeks if we were really busy.
When do you guys start amping up for Christmas? Like, how long will you keep roasted coffee for?
Well, we'll only keep roasted coffee up here fresh, like for a week, essentially. So that's where we put a lot of our focus in production, is not overproducing. Once it's past a week up here, we won't have it for sale. Like, we might send it to the cafe to be brewed as like a dark brew or something. It's still really good for that. But if you think of the lag time of, like, if the coffee's over a week old, say it's 10 days old here, you order it, you live in Vancouver, you get it 3 days later, and then that 5 pounds of coffee is going to last you several weeks. So by the end of it, like, just that 7 days of freshness really makes a difference. And it's easy enough for us to stay on top of, to be accurate. And then this is the other entry point to the silo. So this actually is the other end of that pipe we saw going into the hopper downstairs. So it just makes it a lot easier for us up here to load into the silos as well.
And then it ends up coming up in this bucket elevator that goes up in the ceiling.
Through the roof line, and
then you guys upstairs shoot it into the right silo?
Yeah, so then we've got furnace ducting up there that we can send in. You can see on the top of the silos where it's dropping in up there.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so some of the silos, like you see, there's only one pipe going into those first two. So those are what we call double silos. So we can put, I think, 22 bags of coffee in each one. So it really solves a storage problem for us as well.
Right.
So we can have quite a bit of coffee here at any given time. And then most of them are split in half, so we can put half on one side, half on the other.
Oh, great. Well, thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
I'm just going to walk right over here and zoom in on the roaster a second so that they can see it. Thank you so much.
No, I think honestly, like, if we lost everything.
They have a really nice area that they can taste coffee over there, and then they bag the coffee as well behind us. Different job. Yummy coffee station. And then lastly, their bagging area there, their bags and whatnot.
So the other main system that I was talking about, the 2.5 million BTU afterburner. So if you see the large cylinder on the roof with the small stack coming out of it, so that's a 14-foot afterburner. Again, like I said, 2.5 million BTU. If you look through the end, there's a very thick glass, sight glass, so you can ensure that the burner's on, and it looks like a jet engine with the afterburners on. Like, that's why it's called what it is, and it's got a howl to it. And essentially it just vaporizes everything. So costs a bit in natural gas, but our previous technology underneath the tarp is an electrostatic precipitator, which you may run into at Celgar. Theirs, of course, would probably be the size of the whole roastery. But we used to go up every day after roasting on the 22 kilo roaster. So say we're doing 8 hours of roasting, summer, spring, winter, fall, whatever. Then we go on the roof and pressure wash for another hour, cleaning all the components. We had a 240 degree Fahrenheit natural gas pressure washer that's now built into the building that we don't use anymore. If you know anyone who wants to buy it. And so now, also being highly specialized equipment, our electrostatic precipitator is just sitting on the roof because we can't find anywhere to offload it. So those are essentially the main components of the roasting process. Of course, there's other aspects of production and doing office work, but as far as the plant is concerned, that's essentially the nuts and bolts.
All right, thanks so much, Mike. I'm going to ask you the interview questions here. So obviously, as we can see, we are at the beautiful location of the Oso Negro Roastery. What is the address here again? Do you mind telling me that, Mike?
So here we're number 8, 512 Latimer Street.
Perfect. And so the roastery is part of Oso Negro Coffee. Is it a company or?
Yeah, Oso Negro Fine Coffee. So this is our world headquarters. Not like we have a lot of locations around the world, but it's this is our only roastery and it serves our only cafe. Although we're very fortunate to have quite a few customers other than our cafe. So quite a few grocery stores around town, obviously. Throughout the province, we're in many save-ons and choices markets, as well as in Calgary and a few grocery stores. Edmonton, we're starting to stretch out a bit, and regularly we send coffee as far as Thunder Bay to a cafe.
Wow, that's great. So again, coffee roastery, your main products obviously going to be roasted coffee.
Roasted coffee is our primary product. We do assorted paraphernalia, mugs, hoodies and stuff like that.
Hats.
Hats.
Very nice mugs.
Hats, yeah, old, well-loved hats. Lots of mugs, but yeah, coffee is our primary.
Perfect. So as you just mentioned, you already went through your markets and customers. So you said all the way over to Thunder Bay, throughout Canada, cafes, and quite a few stores, and getting to be more and more stores every time I come. It seems like there's a couple more stores, so that's good.
That's right.
Awesome. So I know we talk about it in the tour, but can you talk a little bit about your production capacity?
Right. So we've never really tested our upper limit production capacity. Obviously, low limit could be nothing, but our roastery is a 45 kilo, so we're doing roughly 75 to 80 pounds. So obviously not the 100 pounds that a 45 kilo roaster could do, but that's about the magic number. It's like they're overrated for the amount that they'll do. But typically in a day, it's not shocking to send 1,000 pounds out of here on a busier day. Slower days, we're probably more like 300 pounds a day. Really depends on the weekday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays are pretty busy. Fridays are busy. Thursdays we're here. Today on a Thursday, it's not very busy.
And Christmas and things like that, you're probably crazy busy.
Christmas is a big ramp up. Interestingly, in the first week of lockdown during COVID, our numbers, we were up 30%.
Wow.
Although cafes were closed, because cafes are closed, people are buying coffee, making it at home. There was a bit of a famine mentality, you could say. It's kind of exemplified by toilet paper. So I think people were buying everything they thought that they needed in large amounts. So we were screaming busy. We'll typically do 2 orders to Save On, 1 to Safeway here in Nelson, and we were essentially doing an order every day.
Wow.
It was pretty crazy. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Especially with like the energy of everything that was going on and a lot of uncertainty. It was interesting times.
That's great. Okay, so I know you mentioned it as well, but if you could just tell me the year it was built and the number of employees, I'll say of all of Oso Negro, if you could. And then I don't know if you consider yourself an operator. In my opinion, you're an operator. You're probably a roaster to yourself, but how many operators or roasters do you have?
All right. Well, so there's 2 operators, myself and Ned. I roast Monday, Tuesday. He does Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We've both been roasting coffee for over a dozen years. Personally, I've been with Oso Negro for almost 17 years now. It's just a great job in Nelson. I grew up here. I was really fortunate to have this job. I'm really fortunate. The roastery came up here in 1993. Obviously, the building has been here for quite a bit longer. Oso Negro started in 1993.
Okay.
We moved in here in 2001, I believe. And
Where did you roast before that?
The coffee was roasted briefly at our Victoria Street Cafe,
Right.
which is where Yum Sun is now.
Right.
We shared that space with the Only Bagel, but due to the amount of smoke that's generated, it wasn't really working out. So this location became the primary roasting location. Previous to that, roasting was all done in Hall Street, where Bebo is now, or Pitchfork is now. And that's where Oso Negro started years ago, way back in 93.
Wow. And so how many employees do you think Oso Negro has?
I believe we have 5 employees.
Right.
Majority down at the cafe. There's 7 of us regulars up here.
Right.
But the majority is for sure at the cafe.
I live in Nelson, and definitely the reputation is that it's a good employer, and they pay fair, and they've got benefits and stuff. So that's good.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like the reason I've been here for so long, like I was washing dishes at the cafe, and then I got to be the backup, so I'm pouring people's coffees, and then I got to be the barista, and that was in the course of about 3 years, at which time I really burnt out on customer service. It's really hard, especially in Nelson. It's odd. And then was very fortunate that the job was open at the roastery, and then that kind of tied into some other interests of mine mechanically. So I also repair and service espresso machines and drip coffee brewers and grinders.
Through Oso Negro or on your? Oh yeah, okay, nice. Okay, so that's good. So, could you kind of? I know that on our tour you show us, but could you kind of give me your specific systems and components that we're going to see? There's going to be the roaster and the silos and...
So, yeah, the bread and butter is certainly the roaster, as we'll describe already or later. It is a 1954 45 kilogram German-made cast iron Probat. The elevator is from Ohio, and that's our grain elevator, which we use to load green beans into our silos. Our silos were engineered but made in-house essentially, and they're plywood and angle iron with some blast gates from Lee Valley. And
then to confirm, you hold different varieties of coffee in there, like different...
Yeah, so each region or each country we might even have 2 different regions of. So for example, Ethiopian, we have currently 3 different Ethiopians. We have a 4th one coming in that's really high quality, special for our holiday blend, and so those are all stored separately. The Central Americans, for example, so we have Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Colombia, we have some Brazil on hand right now, and they will all be siloed separately, but we'll roast them together depending on the like the roast that we're creating. So we'll roast beans together that are grown at similar altitudes and similar varietals, because they'll roast very similarly and come out as a homogeneous roast. Whereas if you took coffee that's grown at super high altitude, it'll grow really slowly and hard, whereas something closer to sea level is a bit more plump and juicy. And so that plump bean really can't handle the heat that this hardened high altitude bean will take. So we'll have to roast them separately and then blend them afterwards, which also gives us a lot of creativity to combine very, very unique flavors together.
Okay. So then you've got the roaster, you've got the silos, you've got the elevator, and then you've got the scale. And
we've got the scale. We have a large mixer, also from Italy. It's hold about 180 pounds mixing, so we'll mix our blends. We'll blend them on a scale so they're precise, and then we'll put them in the mixer for 5 or more minutes, and that really gives us the thorough mixture.
Okay, and then you've got your smoke, or I guess smell vaporizing.
The afterburner.
The afterburner.
The afterburner also key. Like as you can see from this video, we're right in the middle of town.
Yes, there's a beautiful lake.
Yeah, and you know, it's like we are a light industrial building. You can see some venting from the brewery right there. But roasted coffee is very aromatic and creates a lot of smoke, even though there's no real combustion. And so just to be on good terms with the neighbors, because we really do rely on the community to stay in business, and also to not raise too much of a stink with the city to get us out of here. That's why we have the emission control.
Perfect. I know, and remind me after, that I'm going to ask you about the quality of your beans and the difference between like nabob and stuff, because there's an area for additional notes, and I know on my past tours I've really appreciated listening to that. So the next question I'm going to ask you, so we've already been through this, how many operators are at this position or at this plant? And there's the 2. You said already you've been an operator for 17 years, and you probably consider yourself a roaster.
Yeah, I consider myself a roaster, kind of subtitle to operator. So I've been roasting for about a dozen years. But
12 years,
with
right?
Oso,
17.
yeah.
Oh, right. A question that always comes up is, do you have a muster station?
We do have a muster station, and partially through these tours, it was kind of brought into our zeitgeist of like, we should have somewhere that we gather in case of emergency, which I briefly spoke about a major fire. We had a major fire with the roaster several years ago, and our muster station was just naturally across the alley.
Right.
So that's where our muster station is. Yeah, safe distance from there.
Perfect. So not to put you on the spot or anything, but what would you consider a key operator skill or knowledge to work in your operations?
You know, that's always an evolving answer. You know, like as I age and develop, I'm starting to find certain things are more important than others. I used to really focus on multitasking and being able to kind of look ahead and see like what the needs are going to be for production, because we keep a small amount of roasted coffee on hand, and that just ensures the freshness. But as I get older, I'm starting to think like more interpersonal skills are actually more important, like being able to communicate with your coworkers, have open discourse without a lot of negative energy or, you know, overbearingness. I think that's really important. And the older I get now, and like, yeah, just seeing more of interpersonal relations, like that ability to communicate is so important, and really lends itself to having a positive work environment. Yeah. And also like liking what you do has a huge part of it. And like I love this job. I like making a product that people love. I like going to the cafe on the weekend and seeing people drinking coffee that I made. And like a friend of mine kind of pointed out, it's like we're kind of facilitating all these conversations and hopefully positive moments at our cafe, and that's a nice thing to think about sometimes.
Perfect. What do you think on a day-to-day basis some challenges that you might face are here?
That's a good question. Day to day, there's such a variable workflow. So that's the biggest challenge, is to stay ready. You know, if it looks like a day's not going to be very busy, like we can get, you know, 800 pounds ordered in an hour from several different big consumers. So just be prepared, knowing your product, knowing the process, and you know, just trusting in your coworkers is also really good.
Are you the one who, like obviously someone else takes the orders, like the phone calls, they tell you, hey Mike, tomorrow we got to send out this type thing. Do they order the beans, or are you the one who's kind of looking after all of the beans that you've stocked?
Yeah, so
inventory.
Ned does all of our green bean purchasing, so that's really nice. It kind of takes that off of my plate, whereas like I'll kind of take care of all the equipment needs. So
Right.
it's like we're pretty complementary. And then we have Anne, who's like essentially our manager, and she oversees all of us. So it's a really good structure where there's not too many people trying to take care of the same thing, especially if you have any sort of like personality conflicts that can become pretty troublesome really quickly. If somebody has a vision and then someone either comes in and doesn't share the same vision, or kind of craps all over that, you know, like things can get kind of spiraling out of control. So it's kind of organically grown in this way. Like Ned's a real big numbers guy, so he likes crunching numbers and looking at the history of usage and whatnot.
So he'll be foreseeing what's coming up and
Yeah.
making sure you've got it.
Yeah, because essentially, like the coffee that we have here was really thought about 12 to 16 to 18 months ago.
Oh, wow.
To pre-purchase even before it's harvested, have it get to Oakland or to Vancouver, then get in trucks, and then go to our warehouse facility in Castlegar, which is where this delivery truck now is coming from. So it just takes a lot of foresight to not be caught without something you need, and that happens.
Wow.
It still happens, you know, sometimes.
Wow, I didn't realize it was so long, but I guess so. You have to get it before they
Yeah, like,
harvest it.
that's part of the thing.
That's the freshness.
Yeah, the thing with coffee is like we're so dependent on people that live so far away from us, and that's another focus of Oso Negro, is that we're determined to pay the farmers as much as we can, so that they're able to keep working and that they want to keep making coffee, because we're dependent on it. Like without coffee, like that, you know, nothing.
Right. Awesome. You've kind of gone over it, but in many different avenues in these questions. But if I was to ask you what your main duties are, so you've said roasting, so that's a big one, but then you said you do some repairs on machines and stuff, so I'm assuming they're the Oso Negro machines, but what about like other people's machines too, or more the
Yeah.
Oso Negro machines?
So primary focus is, of course, our cafe, our
Yeah.
espresso machine. They require quite a bit of maintenance, quite a bit of cleaning to function properly, and it's really the heart of any cafe is the espresso machine. And the same goes for here. The heart of the roastery is our roaster, so we do quite a bit of preventative maintenance. We have a millwright who also loves coffee, who's retired, that loves coming in and dabble, because there's no roaster repairman within 10 hours of Nelson.
Right.
So those are primary duties, and then outside of Oso Negro, I take care of espresso machines for places like the Co-op. I've done work at John Ward. Whitewater is a big customer of ours. Several cafes around the Kootenays, really.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And cleaning? Are you and Ned the roasters, but do you also clean a lot of in there?
So for however this ended up playing out, it's like the roasters clean the whole, or not the whole roastery, but we sweep the whole floor every day, which sometimes that's the last thing I want to be doing. But you know, it's like you could be seen as a bit of a leader, being in the position that we're at. So like I'll see my boss, John Meyer, picking up garbage off the floor at the cafe on any given day. And I've seen him do that for years. And it took a long time to realize it's like, oh, he's really setting a good example. So I try not to like grumble or drag my feet too much when it comes to sweeping the floor, because it's also a pretty minor thing to do. It's more my ego of like, why am I having to sweep the floor? I'm the roaster, I'm a big deal. But you know, nobody's really that big a deal.
Right.
You know?
So after you've roasted for the day, is there maintenance that you have to do on the equipment that day, or is it pretty like...
Daily, not so much. There is a few monthly like bearings to grease. There's oil in the rear differential that we have to keep eye on, but as far as day-to-day maintenance, it's mostly just cleaning. Like everything to do with coffee is a bit dirty. You'll see from like when we talk about the chaff collector, those bins of chaff, super dusty, it gets everywhere. Coffee is inherently oily, so the oil and the dust kind of marry together on any surface they can. So it's just kind of trying to stay up on anything. It's like anything, like maintenance on your car, like you just need to keep doing all the little things or you're gonna have a big bill at some point.
Right.
So that's what we do, and it's kind of our
So the next question is, what maintenance tasks do you perform? And I feel like you've kind of covered a lot of them.
Like lubrication is huge on any sort of moving equipment, especially with the amount of heat and dust and dirt that's involved here. Occasionally the burners will have to get looked at, make sure that they're all clean, they're ceramic and they're kind of buried away in the inside, in the belly of the machine, really. The afterburner has been pretty much maintenance free, as well as the grain elevator, as it's been designed to do much more work than we're putting it through. Aside from that, not too much maintenance.
Right.
Cleaning on the espresso machine is another big one. Espresso machines really, like, preventative maintenance is big, but often you're just fixing things that break, because there's not a lot of ways to predict some like that like a flare on a pipe will fail. It's just like, oh yeah, there's steam coming out of it. So. Right.
Perfect. Okay, so in your roasting plant, what would you think that the most important thing an operator would need to know or do to work here if you were going to train maybe a new employee?
That's always a good question, and I think my answer always changes for it as well. I would say like ability to work well with others is probably the most important thing. Like if I came into the roastery every day thinking and acting like I'm above everybody else, nobody's gonna want to work with you. Like it's like you could have all the skill in the world, but there's always somebody else out there. And that's the way, like, you know, I've been here longer than any employee for Oso Negro, but I know that I could be replaced. You know, like I'm no one's anything real special. So like just kind of keeping your attitude and ego in check, and you know, everyone has something to contribute. So realizing that, sometimes it's hard to know what that is, but it's like it's out there.
On a side note, does it get really hot in there? Like, do you have to wear any kind of PPE around that? Like, I am assuming the roaster gets very hot.
Yeah, PPE, like really the only regular PPE we wear is hearing protection because there's a lot of noise involved in there. But as far as like protecting yourself from temperature or anything like that, it's not, like.
You're not getting really close to
No,
it?
it's when I was roasting on Tuesday, like it wasn't all that warm outside, but it was 30 degrees next to the roaster. So if I was wearing like leather gloves or something like that, it would be it would be great. And
Right.
then in the summer, it's, like the temperature next to the roaster is often around like 45 degrees, which is just awful.
Right.
But, there's like a nice shoulder season when it's like kind of cold outside and then the roaster just kind of warms you up and it's really quite lovely, but it's short-lived.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. What about any records? Do you guys keep any records here?
Yeah, so we do our daily roast totals. That's probably the longest record we've kept. Now we've started to keep track of blends and pounds going out per blend, so that allows us to help predict green coffee needs and usage in the future. We keep maintenance logs, trying to get better at keeping clearer, more concise logs, as well as for working on espresso machines and whatnot. But our primary records that we keep are all to do with coffee production, like how many pounds are going out, how many green pounds have we roasted, how many pounds are left in each silo, etc.
Right. Okay. And then you've kind of hinted at it a couple times, so I'll bring it up. But is there an emergency situation that you can think about that's happened in the past? And obviously, how did you respond to it? And what were some concerns you maybe had at the time? And then I'm going to add a little bit that's not on the question, but did anything change at the facility or at the plant here after that incident?
Yeah, so 3 years ago, at a similar time of year, I was came in on Monday and we warm up the roaster for about an hour and a half before we start roasting. And so I was warming the roaster up and then I could smell the smell of chaff burning, which is pretty odd. And so I went and I opened up the chaff collector and there was a little smoldering fire in there. I was like, well, that's really weird. And so I cleaned it out. And then as I was getting prepared to start roasting, John Meyer came in and I started telling him about the chaff fire that had happened. And I opened up the chaff collector to show the charred remains, and there was a full-on fire happening in there. And so what had happened was on the Friday beforehand, the chaff collector wasn't cleaned, and I didn't check to see that it was clean, so a little spark had come through just from something in the barrel that had ignited during warm-up, landed in the chaff, and so that was compounded by the fact that the chimneys were overdue for a clean, so there was quite a bit of creosote in the chimneys. So it was a significant fire to do with the roastery. It's 14 gauge steel welded pipes. It was glowing red, and I was watching the glow expand. Like, that's how hot the fire was. I've never seen anything like that before. Like, it was literally getting bigger. And we were trying to like cool it down on the exterior with water and all this stuff. And then I made the call. I was like, get the fire extinguishers, call the fire department. So they came, and by the time they made it up the less than a half a block here, we had put the fire out. And they spent the next few hours walking around with the thermal camera, making sure everything was out. And then that led to further fire inspections of the building. They thought we were deficient in alarms, which was accurate. There was no pull fire alarms in the building, although there was a dry charged fire extinguisher or fire suppression system throughout the building, which was required by insurance. So then the fire department got on us. So now there's pull down fire alarms, flashing strobe alarms throughout the building, which is expensive. And the fire department's happy. And then we started changing our process. We're starting to keep a log of every time we clean the chaff collector. You write down the time when you check it in the morning and then in the afternoon. So it's a bit redundant, but it's just to avoid that in the future, because I was pretty sure the roastery was going to burn down. Probably the whole building was going to burn down. That's how
Yeah, it's an
intense it
old
was.
wooden building, hey?
Yeah. I was standing about this far away from my boss and I couldn't see him. It was
Wow.
that smoky in there too.
Wow.
And it really sucked.
Yeah, and probably cleaning the chimney on a maybe even too frequently basis, probably.
Well, yeah, so now we're basing on the number of pounds roasted, which is a very scientific way to go about it, instead of like we were doing it about every 3 months. So
Right.
of course, anyone that's had a chimney fire in their wood stove at home, and they cleaned, when we took the chimney apart, it was totally clean because everything had burned out of it.
Right.
But, yeah.
Right, good point. Okay, this is getting towards the end here, but do you have any standard operating procedures or any other paperwork that you guys use, you know, step-by-step process documents?
Yeah, not so much. It's very much learning by experience here. Like, we're not writing down how to fill and roll a coffee bag. It's like, here, this is how we do it. This look and see. Everything's hand-on. All of my roasting training I did all those years ago, it was all hands-on experience. I do a little bit of write-ups for when I'm training cafes, like how to make coffee, etc. with an espresso machine, but as far as like your prototypical SOPs, we don't have.
Okay, so if you were unable to come in tomorrow and they called me in to do your job, I would just be flailing around.
It would be really difficult. Yeah. So that's the thing, when like Ned and myself, like, we've both been pretty healthy, and now it's like with COVID, it's like even if you have a cold, we're not going to come into work, which has been fortunate. Like, my daughter just started kindergarten, so she's exposed to a bunch of different stuff at school, but now their rules have changed too. So yeah, we wouldn't be able to just hand over the keys to somebody and get
that'd be tough, hey?
Yeah, it would be.
So part of the questions that the students have to do after this are to, they have to do a block flow diagram and a process flow diagram of your process. And since the students aren't able to come, and I'm not sure if my video will be a great, this happens, then this happens, just because we've been walking around, is there a way that you could block flow the process, even from, let's go as far back as where the bean is coming from, if you could, if you wouldn't mind?
Okay. So coffee's harvested in different times of the year throughout the world, but so say the harvest comes, so all the beans are handpicked that we roast. So that's the big difference, going back to an earlier comment from us and say Folgers or Nabob. We roast only Arabica coffee. They're roasting a majority of Robusta, the two families of coffee. There's also a third, but it's not very common. So they're roasting Robusta. It lends itself well to commercial farming applications, mechanical harvesting, mechanical processing. So Arabica, hand-picked in the mountains into baskets. Those baskets go into larger baskets. They end up going to a process facility. Depending on where they are in the world and what they're trying to achieve, they're either sending it through a wet process where it gets milled and the cherry on the exterior gets taken off mechanically, or a dry process where the sun lets it dry. A lot of the sugars from the cherry go into the bean, so that's where in like a nice fruity Ethiopian is probably naturally dried and processed. So then, regardless of how the cherry's taken off, the coffee's then dried, made stable so it can then be bagged. Now they go into these large plastic bags that go into burlap, kind of keeps a lot of the moisture inside. So from there, they're taken to port of departure, and then essentially like 300 bags into a sea can. So that's another big part of that plastic bag. The sea can sitting on the top of a cargo ship going from Ethiopia to Oakland. It's gonna have a lot of sun exposure, so that bag kind of keeps the coffee a lot fresher. So then the sea can gets to Oakland, to Royal Coffee Distributors. They'll offload it, palletize it. They'll see how much we ordered of that. They'll put that aside for us, and then we'll get a 53-foot truck through our trucking broker, and she'll get it sent up, usually to Castlegar, sometimes to Vancouver, where it's offloaded into our temperature-controlled warehouse. Then a 5-ton truck will come with, say, 14 pallets on it, and that'll get offloaded into the roastery. So then our green beans are here. They either get scooped out of a bag, most often they're put into a silo. So then how the coffee would get to you is phone in an order, or email, or some people still fax, which is a pain in the butt. Don't fax it. But the order will get paid for, stamped out, sent to our production table. There they'll put the appropriate beans in the bags, and whether it's a mail out, pickup, or delivery, it'll get to its certain spot, and then essentially the coffee's on its way to you.
Okay, so when it comes here by your I think you said 5-ton truck.
Mm-hmm.
They come in their bags, and you either store them down in the basement,
Yeah.
or they get offloaded, and you said they get put in the silo.
Yeah.
And then one day you decide you're going to do a certain bean. So you grab your Rubbermaid containers and you fill your Rubbermaid containers with the beans,
Yeah.
and you put them down.
So we'll weigh out say 50 pounds of Guatemalan that'll go into our very dark Central American, and pair that with some Nicaraguan Honduras to the right weight. Then it goes into the hopper that's on the floor, and then that brings it up into the loader of the roaster, into the barrel, from the barrel into the cooling tray. Cooling tray goes to another silo waiting to go back into bins that are only for roasted coffee. From those bins, they'll go on to its appropriate shelf. Then from those bins, we'll use the scale again, weigh out the blends so they're super accurate and very consistent through both Ned and myself. And then those bins of, say, Prince of Darkness are put onto the shelf. And then if that's what you've ordered, then that's what goes in.
Okay. And now I can remember one thing we forgot to talk about, though, is the destoner.
Oh, the destoner.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that. Right. That is a main key component. So
it is, yeah. So as I was talking about coffee being dried, oftentimes it's dried on the ground, either on compacted dirt patios or oftentimes seemingly crumbling concrete ones, because after the coffee comes out of the cooling tray, it goes into the destoner. So essentially it's another fan that's calibrated to lift the coffee beans up the chute, but rocks won't quite have the lift, and so they'll stay down below in a little screen that we can empty out.
Right.
And so, like things we've found in coffee bags, we found like a metal pan that looks like a bed pan, but it's actually for sorting coffee. I found a perfectly preserved like dried salamander.
Wow.
Then I was scooping into a bag, and I thought it was something, and then I pulled it. It freaked me out. Just perfectly. So it must have just gotten put into the bag and died. That doesn't happen very often. But then as soon I brought it out, and then within 7 days it just turned to dust.
Wow.
Just, totally emaciated.
Wow.
So one thing about we don't have to wash the coffee before we roast it, because anything organic that would be harmful to humans is incinerated by the high temperatures, and any sort of dirt or anything is usually either carried away by the exhaust gases or falls out the bottom.
Okay, and you might have mentioned it, though I don't remember. Did you say what the temperature is that you guys usually roast at?
I'm not sure if I did or not. So we'll drop in our roasts probably an average about 185 degrees Celsius, and then we're pulling them at about 214 degrees Celsius. So coffee will do this arc. We'll drop in at 185, and it'll drop way down as it heats up the coffee. And then there's called the turning point, where then the temperature begins to rise. And then so we keep a very close eye on that angle, because if it goes up too sharply, it'll affect the coffee poorly. If it maintains flat, it's also poor effect on the coffee. So that has that's a big factor with our computer. It's just being able to visualize that temperature change.
Right, and that's the computer that was right beside your cooling tray.
Yeah.
Right. And I would like to know, on a personal note, what the difference between like a dark roast and a light roast and all that, and how do you get decaf?
Right. So, decaf is it's decaffeinated either in Mexico using a water process, or in I think they're in White Rock using water process as well. So, Royal Decaf that we offer is decaffeinated in Mexico. It has a much more natural flavor of coffee than and then I guess other decafs, but also the Swiss water decaf, which is organic, but it's a slightly different water process, and it imparts a bit of a flavor to the coffee. There's been some stuff in the news lately about harsh chemicals, like Pete's Coffee and Folgers, I think, got called out on it. They'll use, I can't remember what it is, but it's a pretty nasty chemical that'll dissolve the caffeine. But you can do that with water.
So you basically just pressure wash a bean and it takes the caffeine out?
Yeah, it's like you soak it. So you take 1,000 pounds of coffee, put it in a vat, let it soak. So out of the coffee will come basically all the components that make up flavor. So a lot of acids and sugars and whatnot. So then you've created this caffeine flavor rich solution of water. So then they'll take those beans out. They're now waste. Their purpose was to fill the water full of what was inside them. They'll take that water and they'll filter out the caffeine, but leave almost all of the flavor and sugar compounds, acids and sugars. They'll then take another 1,000 pounds of coffee and put it into the flavor water, where there's only room for the caffeine to come out. This gets pretty deep science. It's not what I do. So then that's how they decaffeinate it, and then it's like filtered and etc. If you go to the Swiss Water Coffee website, they have a short video about it.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and then so the difference between like our lightest roast and our darkest roast is only about 15 degrees Celsius of pull temperature, so the temperature that the coffee gets to before it exits the roaster. We have a blend Oso Blanco that we pull at about 204 degrees Celsius, and our darkest are very dark Central Americans, 219.5. So
And what is it? Is there more caffeine or anything in a dark or light roast, or does it work that way?
There is more caffeine in a light roast, but it's not enough for your body to really notice.
Okay.
What you're going to notice more from a light to dark is brightness, we call it, or in a light roast, it's like there's much more flavor. It's much more pronounced, almost sharper. Whereas a dark roast, the sugars have developed quite a bit more, and those bright flavors have been muted a bit more, so it's much more smooth. Like we're all about the dark roast coffee. A lot of places are all about the light roast coffee, and then the light roast coffee folks are going very specific. Like if this was our farm, they would want all the beans from this aspect, and then they would take those and they would roast them all by themselves to a very specific temperature every time, and then that's what they're offering. Where we would take coffee from here and there and whatever, where it's all it's pretty similar, and then we're going to roast it dark, and then we're going to blend it with other things. It just makes it for more of a dynamic cup. So if you think of like a proprietor's red wine versus like a Syrah or something, like you're going to get a lot more in that proprietor's because they're throwing 6 or 7 different grapes in there. It just makes it more complex. And some people like the purity. Like sometimes I like just a straight varietal. Sometimes I prefer blends. Yeah, there's a lot of good options.
Which brings me, I think, to my last question, is because I've heard on past tours that how do you guys make up your coffees?
It's just creativity and having a general idea of how the coffee will interact with each other. So like a natural Ethiopian is going to be very fruity and lively, but it won't have a ton of body. So then say with our Prince of Darkness, we'll mate that with a big component of Central American. So you're going to get a lot of darkness, a lot of body, and some sweetness with that liveliness. And that's like our Prince of Darkness. The Princess is a bit smoother, so instead of Ethiopian, we're putting like a sweeter Indonesian bean in. Those are 2 of our oldest blends. Ned and I will occasionally come up with something that we've sent to the cafe that they really like, or we do this blend of the month, and occasionally we'll like strike gold. It's a lot of it. It's guessing. A lot of it's guessing.
So it's just you and Ned going,
Yeah,
hey, let's try this and put some of this with that, and
Yeah, essentially.
right, and try it out at the cafe, and they'll definitely let you know.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, Mike. Thank you so much for taking the time.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay.
Here we are at the Oso Negro Cafe. Go check it out. Yummy treats and great coffee.